Hey everyone, I hope you're all well. As I said, this is the video for the pre-course essay for HSP402 for you guys. So this is basically the sort of workshop that I would have run through with you had I been there physically and been able to chat to you and so on. So as per usual in my workshops, I like daggy little graphics like you can see here in this slide, which is where, you go to the library, you find research literature around bushfire scenarios in this particular instance, because that's what your assignment's focused on. Then you read your policies and so forth, and then you read your legislation, etc., and your, emergency management manual, Victoria, so forth. Reading all of these things, bringing everything together, you respond to the assessment that we've got, which is a pre-course essay for 402, and you type up your response. All right, so as per usual, we've got a due date, which is the 11th of August 2017, and it's due to be uploaded to Milo by midnight. You have a word count of 2,000 words, and that is excluding your references. You need to write a 2,000-word essay response to the following scenario. You are an inspector with Victoria Police, and you receive information that a situation similar to the Black Saturday bushfire in Victoria on Saturday, 7th February 2009 is emerging. These fires were the most severe on record in Australia, possibly one of the worst fire events recorded internationally as well. The severe weather conditions, a combination of strong winds, severe heat, drought and little humidity, were the worst ever recorded in Australia. This day coincided with the worst bushfire weather conditions ever recorded as well. So what you need to do is, with reference to your Emergency Management Manual Victoria, the Emergency Management Act, and other material that you deem relevant, such as policies, practices, and so forth, that you've got available to you internally. You need to consider and articulate what actions should occur in the EM space to protect lives and property in dealing with this incident. Focus primarily on the strategic considerations, decisions, and actions of Victoria Police in collaboration with Emergency Management with Victoria and other emergency responders in a whole of government setting. So you really need to think about this in terms of everyone that would be involved, not just Victoria Police, okay? But thinking about what your actions are in terms of Victoria Police and how you're working in collaboration with those other people. A secondary focus could be the tactical management of the specific problem. In your analysis, think in generic terms of this incident on any city within the state of Victoria, draw on and apply readings from the unit, and wider research located using the library databases, Google Scholar, etc. to inform your response. You will need to reference your response. So this is what you need to do. And as per usual, I've provided you with a suggested structure, but I've also got an alternative one. I've got two structures that I've put together for this, and you can sort of follow these depending on which one takes your fancy more than the other. And this is because one of the students in the cohort with Tazpol that I put through this unit last year came up with an amazing structure, and it worked exceptionally well. So I've asked her permission to use the same structure that she came up with to address this task. So my suggested structure that I've got here, you need an introduction. Again, one paragraph. Make sure you include an intro that brings you into the topic, so a couple of sentences about that. A roadmap of each section that your response will discuss, all right, making it very clear what you're going to cover. And then you have a discussion of the relevant legislation, plans and agency policies in dealing with this incident. This is about 1,600 words. And this is where I genuinely sort of said to people, you can structure it however you want. Focused on the strategic considerations, for instance, and then the tactical management of the specific problem. So you might structure the body of your response around the key things that VicPol should do or are planning to do within the context of the legislation, plans, reviews, etc. And I've said you might want to consider structuring it in terms of a couple of subheadings as follows: strategic considerations, tactical management. All right. And then you have your conclusion, summarising your main points and what you've found, and then your list of references. Again, remembering that your reference list is actually excluded from the word count. You don't have to include this in the word count of your assignment. So that's one of the structures that I've put together. The alternative structure that came from a wonderful student who did a great job is a little bit different. They put together, again, an introduction, the same as what I did, one paragraph, an intro to the topic in a couple of sentences, and a roadmap of what each section of your response will discuss. Then the discussion of the relevant legislation, plans, and agency policies in dealing with this incident was cut up into a whole bunch of key questions. And I really liked the way that she did this in her response, because it worked exceedingly well. What are the key issues at this time? What is the response strategy going to be and why? What is my mission? What are the priorities and why? What instructions am I going to give and to whom? What else should I consider at this stage? And this maps in with a whole range of different, online portals that you'll be using, the different types of information that you need to have access to, all of those types of things. And she found it particularly useful to work through those questions. And then, of course, the conclusion is the same as mine, summarising your main points and what you've found, references, listing your references after your conclusion using Harvard style, and again, remembering that they're excluded from your word count. So that just might be a good way of thinking through this. Now, what I would normally do is go through a little bit of a brainstorm with everybody, thinking about the strategic considerations, decisions and actions, and the tactical management of the specific problem. But of course, because this is a pre-course essay, we don't have the luxury of being able to sit face-to-face and do this. So what I did was, when I ran this brainstorming activity with 402 students in Tazpole, we had a little bit of extra time and we were able to actually run a workshop. And I took photos of the whiteboard because I let the students run the workshop themselves. I helped with taking down some notes about different things, and they helped by taking down other notes about different things as well. I took photos of the whiteboard about the different things that they thought about, and I thought it would be useful to include the types of things that they came up with in those photos and include them in this set of slides for you so you could see what they came up with. So you can see in strategic, they're looking at media messaging and information dissemination, liaising with stakeholders about this, and political messaging to and working with council liaison and so forth. In the economic issues, they looked at business closure, loss of income, the cost for the organisation, the cost outlay for the organisation. I'm not sure how they're different, but they obviously thought they were different. Sorry, folks, I cannot remember this. It was over 12 months ago now, so it was a while that we discussed this. Unintended bills or expenditure as well in terms of that. The environmental issues that came up were thinking about wildlife, infrastructure around water, sewerage, electricity, so forth, pollution, explosives, as well as vulnerable locations and vulnerable populations, etc. In the legislation and plans, they had the Emergency Management Act, the Joint Bushfire Arrangements, the State Bushfire Safety Policy, the Hot Day Response Policy, I think that is. I can't quite read the words there, or plans, and ICCS Plus, of course. SFOC, State Controller, FOC and POC, so FOX and POX and all of that sort of stuff. So that's under legislation and plans. Then we've got political, what's the public value, all of that sort of thing, the risk to agencies, the common messaging that you want to put out. And then we've got the social, which is the vulnerable people, where are they located, all of that sort of thing, animal welfare, and isolation in terms of particular groups. Then we've got RMA, which I cannot remember for the life of me what that stands for. I apologise, but that's just my bad memory. Awareness of the policy documents, and I think it's APP that I can see there. Then we've got recovery, what happens with donations and recovery centres, looting, property security, all of that type of stuff. And then on the next slide, we've got the tactical issues, which is looking at resources, roads, structures, crime scene management, about different situations depending on what the circumstances are and what emerges, operational safety, evacuation plans, and TEMP, which I think is the Tasmanian Management Plan, but I think you'll have something like that in place in Victoria as well. Then looking at critical infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and so forth. Technical issues, comms to the public, CCTV. I cannot for the life of me remember what Helo-Rats refers to. Apologies, folks, but I'm sure you can think around what the technical issues might be. The legal issues, enforcement of powers under different acts, crime scene, removal, evacuation, coronial, all of that type of thing. And then we're looking at things like ELMS. Again, I cannot remember what that stands for, but they're looking at TFS internal, TFS websites, plans for different, I think that says towns, but I can't be sure there. Appreciation of DOGs for each town. I think it's DOGs. And in this instance, it was in Tasmania and Lachlan and Glenorchy, but think about that in terms of where your fire might be in Victoria. And then we've got emergency management plans, what's required under the Act, and this, of course, has to be reviewed as they go through. But that just gives you a sense of what the tactical issues are that they thought through as part of this workshop, okay? All right, so I've got a whole bunch of tips here as well. First of all, you can use first-person language, that's okay. Make sure you know and understand the role of Emergency Management Victoria, the Emergency Management Act, and then any other elements, your Emergency Management Manual, all of that sort of stuff, any other elements of EM within Victoria Police, and where you have to link up with other organisations outside that. Start by reading some of the useful readings I've provided for you, but extend on this by finding other readings, for example, public inquiry documents that might be useful around significant national bushfire disasters. Not necessarily other just Victorian ones. We've had significant bushfires in Canberra, for instance, in Queensland and so forth, that you might be able to read about, and that might help you. You just need to have a good understanding of what's involved. Make sure you include specific discussion examples about your own decision making so that your links are clear when you're going through this process. Some other tips: connect examples of your own practice with reading and literature. This is how you analyse your practice in terms of theories, models, ideas. So, for instance, you might talk about how you'd maintain a sense of teamwork across the different people that you're providing information to on the day, and what types of teamwork might you use, that type of thing. You need only mention these very briefly. That's not the focus of what you're talking about in this response. You might tell the leader about what decisions you might make in relation to the scenario. Then tell the reader about how this is guided by your emergency management plan, and do this by bringing in some references and so forth. At least one reference per paragraph is required. Check the marking rubric for specific information on how many references you need. Make sure you use a standard essay structure. That's pretty straightforward. Again, we've already talked through a couple of structures in relation to that. Okay, what does the criteria sheet say? It says quite a lot. It's very detailed. First of all, applying theoretical practical knowledge to manage human, financial, physical resources. You need to address the set task, obviously. You need to apply theories of emergency management in relation to current and scholarly literature. Applying, detailed application of theories of emergency management in relation to current scholarly literature. So you can show that you are sort of across particular ways of thinking. So the PPRR model, for instance, and that you've thought about that and applied it in what you're talking about in your response. And you've done that, you just do that in reference to literature. You don't need some massive theoretical textbook or anything like that. Just you can show that by putting in different types of literature in there. Applying practical knowledge to manage human, financial, and physical resources. Detailed application of practical knowledge to manage human, financial, and physical resources. This is going to be fairly straightforward, and it'll come out fairly well, I think, in your discussion of the different things that you need to think about and how you need to think about it. Our next part of the criteria talks about demonstrating your ability to lead and to represent your organisation in any public and government arena. So this is really looking at the leadership stuff, as well as thinking about the strategic considerations, decisions, actions of VicPol. So clear and specific discussion of police leadership as applies to your practice in terms of, again, you can just bring in research literature and so forth and ideas from that literature. And clear and focused reflection on strategic considerations, decisions, actions of Victoria Police in this particular instance rather than DPFEM. Then we work through looking at integrating your personal attributes. Sorry folks, I can barely read it on my screen here, so I'm just going to work off the piece of paper I've got here. Personal attributes, embodied awareness, intuitive knowledge, creative thinking, innovative, evidence-based decision-making, problem solving. That's very large, but we break it down into different elements. Discussion of elements of tactical police supervision and management in relation to an evidence base. So how are you going to be leading, managing that circumstance based on what the research literature says? Articulate your actions that should occur in emergency management space to protect lives and property. Again, clear discussion of your thoughts about leadership and management, how you're going to do that. Demonstrate creative thinking for innovative evidence-based decision-making. So a response to scenario demonstrates clear, detailed understanding and reference to legislation, plans, agency policies and evidence-based practice around emergency management. So fairly straightforward, and it goes through each of those different areas as we work through it. Next, of course, is just around communication, using appropriate expression, English conventions and so forth, attributing your work of others using references, and then applying the Harvard referencing style as per what we learned about in the other unit. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, just reminding you about how to structure an essay. You need your basic introduction. We've talked about this before. I'm not going to go through it in any detail. Then you need your body, which is where you've got your paragraphs and your different subsections with subheadings and so forth. And then you need to have your conclusion in there. I've given some examples, and I've specifically chosen examples from a good assignment from TASPOL last year when we ran this unit. I've given you an example of a good paragraph here. So it says how the Regional Fire Operations Centre would be activated for this fire. And then they talk through RFOC issues, warnings, considers operational arrangements, SFOC does blah, 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 TASPOL is the support agency. So you can see exactly, and they're referencing all of those different materials in there. Police Operations Centre, led by a commander, would provide forward thinking, etc., etc. And they've referenced in some literature to there. Yay! and then, committee arrangements provide a platform for partnership, and then that goes into the next little section. So that gives you an example of a good paragraph, guys. That's what a paragraph needs to look like in your assignment. Not 2 sentences, at least 5 sentences. And bringing in your research literature and your references to support your ideas, regardless of whether or not it's research literature, or if it's the Emergency Management Act, or if it's the Emergency Management Manual. These things need to be referenced as well. A quick example of an introduction. So this is from, again, the same assignment, when emergency threatens communities, blah, blah, blah. So you can see a couple of really broad, overarching topic sentences to start the introduction, and then they get into their roadmap. This paper identifies strategic considerations, legislative arrangements, plans and principles relative to EM, focusing on how these guide the structures, blah, blah, blah. And then they talk through what's comprised of DPFEM. Catastrophic fire event would rely on blah, 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 blah. It will conclude that shared leadership delivers consistent whole-of-government responses. That's what a good intro looks like in relation to this task. And then we've got our conclusion, again, from the same essay. This catastrophic fire emergency challenged communities, and a couple of nice introductory topic sentences. Then they summarise what they've done. This paper articulated governance arrangements, identified established partnerships, highlighted the importance of shared leadership, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and then they sort of said, concluded, moving forward, we need to look at. So again, that just gives you an example of a good conclusion for this task. Okay, and at that point, I would normally ask for questions, but because there's no one in the room but me, that's going to be a bit awkies. So we'll leave it. But if you do have any questions about anything I've talked about in this video, don't hesitate to get in touch and to clarify. Anyway, folks, that's it. I hope to goodness that has helped you. And let me know if you've got any queries. See you later.